It's an honor to be here today to present some examples of sustainable transportation from Sweden. So we started putting it in a climate context. So Sweden has ambitious climate goals. The overall national goal is to reach net zero emissions by 2045. And for the transport sector specifically, we have minus 70% by 2030 from 2010 levels. So slightly more ambitious for the transport sector. Now, the city of Gotemburgo that I'm from has the ambition of being climate neutral by 2030. That is roughly, when you look at the numbers, minus 70% of emissions. And even here, the ambition for the transport sector is even more stricter. So it's minus 90% of the emissions by 2030 from 2010. So how are we going to achieve these ambitious goals? Well, the overall strategies rely on three different legs. So one of them is that we have to have a transport-efficient society. That is, we have to reduce the demand for transport and mobility, but we also have to shift it towards more efficient modes, such as public transport, biking, and walking. The vehicles that are left, that we're still going to have and rely on, such as buses and cars and trucks and so on, they have to be as efficient as possible. And then they have to be supplied with carbon-neutral fuels and energy, and mainly electricity. So putting this into practice, what does this mean? And I'll give you some examples of what is being done actually in Gothenburg and in the region around. So one example is the electricity project. So electricity is an innovation project, and it started off as one electric bus line between two campuses in Gothenburg city that you see here on the map with the river in between. Now, for you from Santiago, one bus line, electric bus line, might not sound that ambitious. I know you have one of the biggest bus fleets, electric bus fleets in the world, which is very impressive, and I'm looking forward to know more about that. But what's special about this is not so much that it was an electric bus, but the fact that it was an innovation project that put together academia, industry, the city of Gothenburg, public transport, science parks, and so on. To be able to see not just can we substitute diesel and CNG buses with an electric bus, but what can we do? How can we take advantage of the fact that it's electric? And how can we be part of creating a public transport system of the future? So one of the advantages of having a bus that doesn't have any local emissions is that you can have indoor bus stops. Here it might be nice if it's really warm outside, as it is here, if you have air conditioning instead. If you're in Sweden, in Gothenburg, it was minus 13 degrees last week. Much nicer to sit indoors and wait for the bus, right, than being outdoors in those conditions. And also, it opens up possibilities for new ideas about what is a bus stop. So here is a photo of an example of when they had a pop-up line with a bus stop that was a library also. Another example is, or actually we stay there, is the fact that the emissions are not coming from the bus. So in a diesel bus, you have a lot of emissions coming out of it. But in an electric bus, not having that, you could actually use it, as some of my students did, to test out having sensors on the buses to measure air quality. So then you can have a much more dynamic way to understand the air quality in the city than the stations that are existing. Now, when we're talking about public transport, normally it's said that a good public transport system is a public transport system that is used by the rich people and not just the poor people. So what better sign than having the King of Sweden wanting to ride the electric bus line that we had in Gothenburg at that time. So now, the innovation, that part of the project, that bus line doesn't exist anymore, but the innovation continues, and we still have projects going on about how is it that the buses can become more attractive. So this is done through interviews, focus groups, and so on. How can we design better buses? But the innovation has also spread beyond public transport and buses, and now we have an electricity project going on construction sites. So how can we have electric machines, excavators, and so on? And how does that affect the construction places? And also it has led to an electrification of the bus fleet in West Sweden. And so in West Sweden, it started in 2019, where it went into 60 buses. Today, there are 460 buses that are electric of 750. And in 2030, the aim is to have all city buses electrified. And that's not just the city of Gothenburg, but also in smaller cities around in the area around West Sweden. Now, sustainability is so much more than just shifting the type of bus that you have. We cannot just rely on the fact that we have an electric bus and think that we've done everything. So first of all, the electricity supplied has to be green. So in West Sweden, the Public Transport Authority gets their electricity from wind, solar, and hydro. But there's also a question of the supply chain of the buses. How are these buses produced? What are the raw materials? How are they extracted? And I think coming in here in Chile, you are well aware of the implications of the mining industry and how important it is to have sustainably sourced metals when you are talking about different applications such as batteries and so on. And it's also questions about human rights and not providing forced labor. So unfortunately, there are cases going on even in Sweden in which we import electric buses, and there are cases of forced labor connected to it. So the agency in West Sweden started the Ethical Trading Initiative of Sweden. And there they have collaboration with other public transport authorities, both in Stockholm and in the south of Sweden, to ensure that these buses are ethically sourced. Another project relies more on different areas in Gothenburg, and it's the Gothenburg Green City Zones. Here there are 3 different zones with different character. One is more of a working hub, one is a place for events where you have an amusement park, a fair, and you also have a big arena. And the third one is a residential area slightly outside of the center of Gothenburg. Now the aim is to have no emissions from transport within these zones. And again, this is a project in which you combine many different actors, as you can see here, both from industry and academia and the city, to be able to see how can we work in these areas. So giving 2 examples from this is, one is where you have cars from electric car sharing and from company cars that provide electricity to the grid. So the vehicle to grid from the batteries of the electric cars to be able to support the electricity grid as well. The other one is wireless charging of taxis. So here you see the picture, 2 taxis. You can see maybe a blue square in front of one of the taxis. That's where the charging comes from. So when the taxi comes over there, they're charged. And the idea is to expand these further and to have many more examples of different things. So transport, though, is more than just the movement of people, it's also the movement of goods. So another research project that I'm part of is also dealing with not just in Gothenburg City, but all over Sweden. It's regional and local distribution of goods. And we have all kinds of goods that are being distributed, everything from mining goods to pharmaceuticals and chemicals. And these are actual diesel buses that are trucks that are being replaced with electric trucks. And so we have 63 battery electric trucks, of which 18 are prototypes. And we are studying in the daily operations and also seeing everything of how it affects everything from business models to the workers, the drivers, and the people actually in the supply chain. And again, transportation is complicated, right? So there are many different actors. That's why we have to involve all these actors when we're doing these innovation problems. But we also have many different types of vehicles that have to be substituted. And in the beginning, I talked about the transport efficient society, right? So we have to substitute cars also with bikes. And here is another possibility for electrification. We have electric bikes. This here is a pure research project that I've been working on together with my group, in which we simulated one day the movement of all the people living in West Sweden. And we saw which trips, taking into consideration all the activities that they were doing during the day, could be replaced, which car trips could be replaced with an electric bike as well. We also took into consideration gender and what type of trips they were doing. So we found out that about roughly half of the trips could be substituted. And this corresponds to 25% reduction of CO2 emissions. Now, the reason why the reduction is lower than the amount of trips is because it's mainly shorter trips that are being replaced. But we see that in denser areas, there is a higher potential to reduce emissions. And in the area of Gotemburgo, which is on the graph that you see here, the light color one, we can get reductions up to 70% in some areas of Gotemburgo. Now, mobility is so ingrained in our daily life, and there's so many things that affect it. It's not just providing with like electric buses. Where we live and how we live, and the mobility services provided at our place of residence are also important. So here is one more example of a research and an innovation project, which is actually a residential building that was built and apartments sold, which was a positive footprint housing. So a lot of sustainability issues came into play here. One of the things is that it doesn't have any residential parking. It doesn't mean that the people living there don't have a car. Some of them do have a car, they just park somewhere else. But what it does have is that it has access to an electric car sharing in the vicinity of the residential building. There's electric bike sharing with cargo bikes as well. And then another aspect, which is maybe not mobility related, but if you see here, there are these gray parts on top of the roof of the building. Now, there are solar panels on this roof. And solar electricity, as you know, well, here you have a lot of sun, but there's not always that much sun in Gothenburg, but there's enough of it. But you need to store the electricity, because it might be sunny in the middle of the day when almost nobody is home and needs to use the electricity. And then in the evening, when they come home and want to cook, there's no electricity being produced from the solar panels. So instead, you store it in batteries. And guess what? The batteries that were used to store the electricity from the solar panels are batteries that came from the buses from the electricity that I talked about in the beginning. Remember the electric bus line? When those batteries in the buses were not good to use in buses anymore, they've been used to store electricity from solar power here. So it's kind of tying up the knot and seeing how it's connected and how we have to see the connection between many different innovations to achieve solutions. So summing up, what I want to see is that through different policies and new technology, one can achieve innovation and behavioral changes that then help us achieve the ambitious climate goals that we have. Thank you.